Welcome to Speak with Purpose, a celebration of thought and influence, where bold ideas ignite action. Join Christine Gagnon and the TEDxCatawba community in shaping the future.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christine Gagnon, founder and organizer of TEDxCatawba. We're here today to introduce one of our esteemed speakers for our 2025 event to be held here in Hickory, North Carolina on June 14th at the Drendel Auditorium. I'm joined today by Michael Galinsky. He is a filmmaker, photographer, and musician, as well as co-founder of the production company Rumor. For over 3 decades, he has collaborated with Suki Hawley and David Bailinson, I might say that wrong, on award-winning narrative and documentary films. Their work has screened at major festivals and aired on HBO, ESPN, A&E, and Netflix. 2 of their documentaries, Horns and Halos and Battle for Brooklyn, were Oscar shortlisted. Michael is currently co-authoring a forthcoming book, Lessons Learned, reflecting on their creative journey. Welcome, Michael. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me today. I'm sorry I butchered David's name.
You got it right. It's David Bailinson, and he's
wow.
a great partner. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm really bad with names.
Yeah.
So I want to tell everyone how we met because it's such an interesting story. So, Michael, you are the twin brother of Adam Galinsky, who I know from Columbia University because I was his TEDx speaker coach at Columbia Business School. And here we are. I have such a treat because now I get to meet you and get to work with you. So I just wanted to say thank you for being open to this. You're also living here in North Carolina, so you're a local.
I am. And this is where Adam and I grew up, so we're about an hour and a half from you.
I actually didn't know that is where Adam and yourself, where you grew up. That is amazing.
Yeah, actually, in the talk that I give, I talk about my father and how he had an ulcer. When he had that ulcer and was struggling, it was right behind me. So it's a house full of very strange memories.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. So I want to get started by maybe sharing that we came in contact when you were recently in New York. And I think there was a question from Adam, like, Christine, are you in New York? Like, let's get together. So you were recently in New York to show your film Battle for Brooklyn. And I would love for you to tell our audience a little bit more about why you were there, what you were doing, what you were celebrating, and what you were sharing.
Yeah, so Battle for Brooklyn is one of those films you mentioned that was shortlisted for the Oscar in 2011. And it's a film that we started in 2004. And what's interesting about this conversation is it's very deeply connected to the film that I'll be talking about in the TED Talk, which is All the Rage. Because when I started that project, it was at the tail end of actually dealing with the other movie, Horns and Halos. And when we make our films, we've really pretty much had to just bootstrap them without grants or anything like that. So there's been a lot of struggle to make them. And it's been a big struggle to distribute them. So with Horns and Halos and Battle for Brooklyn, they were both self-distributed films. Like, we had to get them in the theater in order to get them qualified to be shortlisted. And that was a lot of work and a lot of pressure. And so at the tail end of the Horns and Halos run, I was having a lot of leg pain, and I started Battle for Brooklyn, and I was shooting sometimes 8 and 10 hours a day in icy weather outside.
Wow.
Because the movie Battle for Brooklyn is about, there was an announcement that a Garden of Eden was going to grow in Brooklyn, that the state was going to help support a basketball arena and housing project. None of that mentioned that this was going to require a massive amount of eminent domain. And eminent domain is when the government takes property for a public use or purpose. This was very tenuous about how it was a public use or purpose, because they were taking this property, this public property and some private property, and handing it over to a developer for a commercial gain. But was also kind of lost in the weeds was that there was a big community that lived there. And I knew that because our daughter went to daycare at like a half a block away from the site. So when I saw this article, I was like, what the hell's going on? And I was asking my friends and my neighbors, like, what do you think about this? This sounds really strange, because they're talking about it as if they're saying it's a desert, that no one lives there, but it's like people live there. And I saw a sign saying, stop the project. I was like, great. So I called the number on the sign, and Patty Hagen, who's one of the characters in the film, answered, and she just started talking like crazy. And I was like, honey, I will see you tomorrow. Because you need, if you're going to make a movie, you have to follow a character. And she was a wonderful street fighter. And I was like, great. She had also been working on this project for a long time before even the project was announced, because she had sniffed out that things were happening. She was a former journalist and she was a community activist. So when it was announced, she was immediately started the Prospect Heights Action Coalition to fight this thing. So I was following her around. She was telling me everything about the project. And, it was hard. And that's when I started to have the pain. And I eventually ended up in Dr. Sarno's office. But before that happened, I shot for 6 months, pushing through that pain until I finally collapsed from it. But in that process, she said to me, here's these, poor people who live here. Here's these lofts. And she called them the loft dwellers. These are these new industrial buildings, not new buildings, but industrial buildings that had been converted to lofts. One of them had been there for a long time, and it was a lot of artists who had been there for 20 and 30 years. But two other ones were recent conversions that were much more commercial conversions. And she said, the loft dwellers are going to sell out. All but one. I think there's this one guy who's going to fight, and his name's Dan Goldstein. And Dan went on to become the main character of the film. But Dan had also designed the poster for a previous movie of ours because he was roommates with a high school friend of mine in college. So it was just like,
it's a small world.
This is crazy. Yeah. So I went over, I started filming, and he was like, listen, I was a peace studies major, right? Like, I don't really want to fight this, but if I don't fight this, when will I ever stand up for anything? And it was like, yeah. So he fought that project for 8 years, and we followed it.
That is so
it took
powerful.
8 years for it to come to conclusion. And that's really hard when you're making a documentary with no support to kind of stay on it. And we did. And what's also interesting is when we finished that one and we self-distributed it and no one would show it and it eventually got shortlisted, I had the same problem happen again, which is I got crushed to the floor because I pushed myself just way beyond my capacity, because that's how I learned to live in my childhood, that I had to take care of things and I had to keep fighting. And so, the movies are all interconnected. All of our stories are interconnected. And what I'm trying to do here is just say that also led to the film about Dr. Sarno. Because when I hit the floor the first time, I went to see Dr. Sarno. And Dr. Sarno is the doctor who's at the center of our film, All the Rage, which is what I'll be discussing. But the crazy thing about this whole story, you brought up my brother, is that I knew about Dr. Sarno because my father, who had the bleeding ulcer right here, immediately got neck pain from a fender bender, right? So he withheld a lot. He repressed a lot of emotion, and he was a psychologist. So 10 years into his pain crisis, someone gave him Dr. Sarno's book, which explained that chronic pain is what he had discovered is not based mostly on any kind of structural abnormality, but instead the repression of emotions. And the repression of emotions causes immense amounts of fight and flight in our body. And when we do that, we get flooded with stress hormones, and those stress hormones are going to fight. They're going to fight to figure out what it's like if you call up an army, the army's going to go to war. And if there's no other threat, there's not like a tiger to run from or a guy with a knife, but that the threat is actually that you might have that emotion you had in childhood, and you learned that the emotion was so scary you were going to do anything you could to avoid it. Your body is at war with itself. One part of you is saying, hey, you got to pay attention to this emotion. And the other part's saying, shut the fuck up.
No, I can relate to that. And I want to go back to this sort of living in the same home where some of those, I'd say, fairly traumatic experiences happened. And it is amazing that you're sitting here having this conversation and you're calm and you're cool and you're collected and you're talking about your work. And I just want to call that out. And there are so many other things that come to mind when you talk about your documentaries, and I'll just throw some out there, and then you can kind of hook on to whatever you like. But one is that it seems stressful to make a documentary. One is because it seems to take a long time depending on, the story. You also don't know when that story is going to end. And so there's this sort of uncertainty about it. The other thing that sounds stressful to me, aside from the funding and the distribution, is really that it feels to me like your phone might ring at any point in the day where you need to go and film something. So it seems like there might be this element of chaotic art. Can you talk
Yeah.
about any of those? Are those true? Is that just
Oh,
kind of me
absolutely. Well, I
making
think,
stuff up?
especially, with the advent of reality TV, which kind of happened after we started making documentaries. And I also want to say that my partner, Suki, and I started out making narrative films that were a kind of hybrid documentaries before that was a thing. And
Mm.
what I mean is that at that point, video wasn't really an option because there weren't consumer video cameras or even professional ones, except it was just very difficult to think about making a film, like a film on video. So when we wanted to document the underground music scene, A, it was really expensive to shoot on film,
Hmm.
and B, you couldn't really just endlessly shoot film to figure out what it was. So what we did was we said, we've experienced this. Let's write a script based on those experiences and these incredible people we've met. And there's a funny story attached to that. But so when we were making narratives, we were really kind of the early part was research. You're doing something, you're being a part of something, and then later you write a script and then you film it, and that can be a pretty short process. We did that. We shot for 2 weeks, but that was really hard because you needed a crew when you were shooting on film, and with no money and trying to feed a crew and travel with people, it was tough. But we were able to do it, and we learned from it. So when it came time to make a documentary, we were thinking more of old school documentaries like the Maisels brothers and D.A. Pennebaker, which is when you immerse yourself in a story and you spend a lot of time on it and you shoot quite a bit, right? And so when our first documentary story arose, we had just purchased a video camera. And I'd been renting a video camera for some things. And I was like, they were only like $3,000. So we scraped things together and we got a video camera. So then when we found out that a guy from that same music community was going to republish a discredited biography of George Bush, which became Horns and Halos, we were like, oh, we can do this. And so we just started shooting. I shot, Suki shot, we could both shoot. And so, yes, it was that thing. And of all kinds of different pressures. But I think that there's something I've learned over time, and something I would put in that book, Lessons Learned, is that the front end of a documentary is probably the most exciting, but also the most difficult. Because when you enter a situation and you don't know what's going on, you kind of have to shoot everything because you don't know what's going to matter.
Exactly. Oh my goodness, that just
And then
sounds
once
like
you start to find your characters, though, and you find out what the story is, you shoot a little bit less all the time. Because now you know where the story is headed. And so in the first 6 months, I was shooting almost every day because it was so chaotic and there were so many fights happening and so much media manipulation taking place and so many things to follow, and you don't know which one's going to be the important one. That's when I hit the floor and I couldn't shoot for a while. But when I got back to shooting, it became more clear what the story was becoming and then the set points of the story. So after a while, I wasn't shooting as much. But that was also a learning curve, and I've kind of learned that over time how not to shoot as much, but you still get pulled into it.
I want to share with our audience your partner that we mentioned in your bio, Suki. Yeah. She's actually your wife, right?
Yes,
and so I find it tremendous that you can work with your spouse. I mean, John and I were trying to program the garage recently, like the numbers you punch in, and I think he wanted to murder me. So like we can't even program the garage door opener together. We just don't work. We are great partners, but not when it comes to work. So I would love to hear your experience here. It sounds like you're quite a team.
It's not easy. It has not been easy, and I think it's very hard. And so we're still kind of we're even 30 years in, we are really struggling to figure out how to do that. And one of the things is that like I tend to be the one who goes out and shoots and finds the stories, and Suki is really like one of the best editors you could possibly imagine. And I think some of it has to do with just how she struggles to find a way to communicate things in the most efficient manner that doesn't lose heart and has a really profound rhythm to it. And so she's really obsessive about editing. It's kind of in the same way that I'm obsessive about capturing. So, you brought up earlier, it must be hard. Yeah, it's devastatingly difficult for me to not be shooting when there are things going on with the project. And it's really, it's been a long road to get to where I'm not shooting as much, because it's also exciting. It's kind of like taking notes, but it could be overwhelming for the editor if they don't have the full context outside the lens that you do. Right. So like we recently, in the last few years, we've gotten involved with the Savannah Bananas, who are a kind of, they're changing baseball. They created a new game. And what happened is our other partner, David, has initiated a bunch of work with ESPN, and they asked us to make a short about the Savannah Bananas, which actually I didn't even go shoot because of another crazy story. But Suki edited it and David shot it, and it was very viral. And what happened with it was, one of their business models is they sell a lot of Savannah Bananas merch. Their merch sales went up 40x based on that.
Wow.
And it
that's
never went
impressive.
down. But the other thing that happened was that this is when they were a college summer league team. And the previous year they had played a single game. Oh, actually, it was right after we shot it. They did their one city world tour testing banana ball. And what banana ball is a game where they've changed the rules of baseball to make it more fun, faster, and more exciting. The players dance.
Baseball is a long game traditionally, I have to say.
Well, banana ball has a 2-hour time limit.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I could definitely drink my beer in that time.
Yep. And it also, their company name is Fans First. So they're really focused on making fans just invested and happy and well taken care of. So one of the first rules they thought up was, if a fan catches a foul ball, it's an out.
Oh.
So the fans definitely impact the game, every game.
I need to watch this.
It's crazy. Yeah. And so what happened was, they said, we're going to do a 7-city tour. You guys should follow it. So we pitched it to ESPN, and a couple weeks before they started that tour, they said yes, which was a nightmare, right? We had to gear up and figure it all out. But we followed them, and we made this series for ESPN called Banana Land. And the next year, so right at the end of us filming that series, they got rid of the college summer league team. They were going to play that season, but they said, we're going all in on Banana Land. And the next year, they did a 30-city tour, and they went from playing to 50,000 people to playing to 500,000 people. And the next year, they played, I think it was 7 MLB stadiums and sold them all out. And they went from playing in front of 500,000 to 1 million people. This year, they're playing in front of 2 million people. Their ticket wait list is 4 million people. And I just got back this weekend from filming them sell out Death Valley in Clemson, right? The Memorial Stadium there. And it was the most electric thing you could possibly imagine.
So is the filming still going on then in terms of following their story? Is that?
Yeah, because we want to make a movie, but, we kind of became their archivist of, their documentarians. And it's like, that's what I'm saying. Even though nobody's paying for it, I just can't let it go, because it's like you're at the beginning of the NFL or UFC. And I know how important that the firsts are. So this year I'm just focusing on the first NFL stadium, the first college football stadium, the introduction of other teams. So they're turning it into a league. Anyway, the point is that what I learned in this process is I shot it all. So I had to go through every shot and make clip notes. And with those clip notes, I put in every person's name, but I also put yellow on the things I think this is definitely something we need to look at. That would go to a pre-editor who would compile that 11 hours of footage into something like a 2-hour cut. Mm-hmm. Then I would make notes on that. They would cut it down on that, and then an hour cut would go to Suki, so that she could do what she could do without being overwhelmed.
Oh, I was going to ask you a question about that. That sounds a bit more manageable. So then do you take chunks of footage and you don't wait until the end of a project to do the editorial? Do you do it in chunks? Is that how the process works?
I mean, sometimes, but if you don't know where the story's going, there's not so much value in looking at the footage because you don't know what you're looking for. So you kind of have to wait till a certain point where you are cognizant, and that when you go back, you're like, oh yeah, this is when that happened. And then you can make note of it. Oh yeah, this is important. Otherwise you're just like, you're drowning in it. So it's kind of about patience, as well.
Oh, I'm really bad at patience, but
Yeah.
better you than me. I have another question for you.
Sure.
So these projects, I think you alluded to it in a prior comment, they're fairly complex. They're involved,
Yeah.
and you have to follow the story so deeply. And in the beginning, like you said, you might not know, where the storyline goes.
Right.
It seems like in reading some of the timelines in your bio, you've had multiple projects going on at the same time.
Yeah.
Is that true? And if so,
Yeah.
how do you keep sane?
I don't.
Oh, okay. Either do I.
I'm not that sane, and it is a little bit of a problem. But also, I would say it's hard because, I will push myself beyond my capacity, and Suki won't. So some of the times it's like I'm trying to get her involved in projects like, one that's been a little bit of a stress between us and a struggle to kind of stay focused on is I was a sperm donor when I was just out of college for a little bit. And it wasn't something I mean, when I'd meet someone in a bar, they say, "What do you do?" And I'm like, "I'm a bike messenger and a sperm donor." And I thought it was, I didn't want it. It wasn't something I hid and the reason I did it is because my roommate in college had done it through college, and I thought that's weird. And then after college, he was just like, "Look, you're doing a mitzvah for a family in need. What's wrong with that?" Okay.
Interesting perspective.
Let me think about it. Here's the fun part. It was really a mitzvah for me. But what happened is when I had kids, part of this goes back to all of these stories involve kind of like evolving cultural understandings. You know what I mean? Like people's, the way the world changes, and we are, we have our own beliefs, but our beliefs are impacted by the people in our family and the people in our community and the people in the larger community. It's kind of like, what Vance got slapped down for the other day, saying, first you pay attention to your family, and then the next layer, and the next layer, and the next layer. It was that Catholic thing. But the point is that all those things impact us in ways that we are both aware of and less aware of, right? So, for instance, after World War II, culturally we said, you know what? That was a lot of trauma in the first half of the century, so we're just going to tuck that down here for a while so we can get a roaring economy and we can put on happy faces and everyone's going to live the American dream, which worked for a little bit until all that trauma came out in the 60s and we saw that, expressing itself because you can't keep it down forever. And then in the 70s and 80s, we pushed it back down through consumerism, and then it comes back up and it comes back out. But through this whole period of time, and I got off track because I do that sometimes.
You had me at sperm donor.
Yeah. Okay. I'll go back to that. So, the thing that I was off track about was that once when I decided to do it, part of the thing I thought was, nurture is everything. Nature isn't really that important. We grew up with Free to Be You and Me, Sesame Street, and if you just nurture properly, everything's going to be wonderful and everyone's going to thrive. But that's not really possible, right? And
I understand exactly what you're saying.
And we weren't actually very connected to our families. We lived down here in North Carolina. My dad's family, which was small, was in New Haven, and I think we went there and visited his mother once. His dad was dead. And we sometimes visited my mom's family in Queens. But I didn't feel that kind of like non-nuclear family connection. So I just didn't realize just how powerful nature was until I had my daughter and she came out who she was, and I was not going to nurture her into anything that she wasn't. I knew that I could mess her up by not letting her be who she was. Then the other daughter came out. She was completely different. The complete opposite. I was like, oh, this nature stuff is, oh my God. And then I was in a hair salon where the woman on the corner would see me struggling with Fiona, who was 4, and the baby and the dog. And she'd say, "Give me that girl." And she took her inside while I would walk. And Fiona loved it in there. So she'd hang out in the hair salon and I'd walk the dog and the baby because I'd wear the baby. And I came in and she said, you got to go for your boy. Speaking of like cultural ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, no, I am done. And then I went, oh my God, I might have one. Oh my God. And they probably want to know who I am. So I started looking into it, and I found out there was a lot of donor conceived people who were mad as hell because donor conception is actually intentional adoption with secrecy. I mean, I wasn't given a choice, I don't believe. Do you want to be a known donor or a non-donor? It was all anonymous because they said that's just better for everybody. But I saw that it wasn't. And I knew from adoption that we had learned that it can't be secret. All the laws say you can't keep that hidden from the child. But here we are doing it intentionally, without thought. And I am not arguing that donor conception is terrible or a bad thing. What I'm saying is we need to ask the hard ethical questions. What do the children need? Not just what do the adults want? And for a long time, it was just what did the adults want, because it was a business and the adults wanted it. And they were all well-intentioned. And no one was counseling them to say, we have this adoption thing that we've learned that the secrecy isn't good. So we are making sure that secrecy is not what we do as a society. But that's what, anyway, so I started looking into it, and I ended up writing an op-ed saying that, as a donor, I wish I had known this information, and I don't think it's really ethical to keep it secret. I don't think there should be anonymous donation, because I'm listening to all the people who are saying this was really problematic for me. So I wrote that up, and immediately a friend reached out and said, did you know I was adopted? Which I didn't. Another girl wrote me and said, oh my God, what you wrote is so great. I've written a script, and I'm a musician. She sent me her music. She sounded like Cat Power, who's an artist I really like.
I love Cat Power. Oh my goodness. Not a lot of people in mainstream kind of know who she is. I really do love her music.
But I came from not mainstream. And so we actually, we knew her quite a bit. And so it was like, wow, that's great. And a couple of days later, she was train hopping across the country. She ended up living with us for 4 months. And I
Cat Power?
No. This is Alana. No, okay. Cat Power was living with my friend when she moved to New York, which is how we knew her. But and we were writing a script with him. So it's a very small world. All these things.
It really is. Oh my goodness.
But so she was this amazing musician. So she ended up living with us, and Fiona was, I think, like 7 at the time, and thought of her as her older sister because she was living in her house. And they just had this great connection. She became this character. Then my adopted friend, a couple weeks later, a half-brother reached out. She was searching for her Iranian foreign exchange student father, and he then found him. And she met him. So that story kind of closed up. But then 2 friends of mine were getting married, and 2 guys I knew, and I was the photographer. And then they decided to have kids. So I followed that story. And then another friend. So there's all these stories that I was filming for years, but we never had time to edit it. And so it kind of like stayed in this limbo, but I followed them now for many of these stories for 15 years or so. And so I still want to get to it. But what also gets interesting is 6 years ago, my mom was in the hospital with pneumonia. I got a call. I didn't know what was going on. I rushed up there. I thought she was going to die. I got her calm. I'm holding her hand, and I get a text from my cousin saying, I just got off the phone with your daughter, Holly. Do you remember you were a sperm donor? So here I am holding her grandmother's hand, who might be dying, and I'm like, what did I do? I started filming.
Oh my God. Of course.
I knew I needed context. But what's interesting is, so I texted her and said, I'm so glad you wrote to me. I can't talk right now, but I will call you tomorrow. I'm in the hospital with my mom. And I did. I mean, that was an all-night affair for 5 nights. It was so chaotic. But I made time. I called her. We had an amazing conversation. I sent her a care package of like all of our work. And she is now my best friend in the world.
Wow, this is a tremendous story. So this will, it sounds like, be a piece of work that will be forthcoming based on...
It might be, yeah. Well, yes, definitely. But I actually... So a month after we met first, it was my brother and my 50th birthday. So I went to New York for that, and she lived in Rutgers. So we met at Penn Station, and I filmed us meeting, and that's all I've shot, because I just didn't want the camera to get in the way of our relationship. And I understood that as the person who created the situation, all of the responsibility laid with me. And I just had to make space and follow her lead. It could not be, the responsible thing is, it couldn't be about what I want or what I need. I had created something that I had to make the space for. And that worked out well, so that over time we've transitioned into like actually, she's my most trusted counselor. I ask her for advice all the time, because she's got a lot of wisdom and had a lot of struggles. So she's learned a lot, and she's just tremendous. It's
commendable, because I would think, and I'd love to see that footage someday of that Penn Station meeting. But to say, I want to make sure that, I kind of follow the lead here, and that I'm, empathetic and compassionate, and I think that's probably hard to do, just given the nature of what you do and what you love and what you're passionate about, but you were able to do it. So
I kind of
congratulations to
I had
you.
to. I mean, I just knew that what was important to me was, yeah, yes, as an artist, it was important, but what was more important is, essentially righting a wrong, which is to have been hidden and to not have been present when it was requested. And, I think it totally makes sense that the donor doesn't have rights because the donor has made the conscious decision to give up those rights. So if the child doesn't want contact and doesn't reach out, they don't have any right to go search out the children. But I do believe that if you do it, you actually have a responsibility, right? So it's rights versus responsibilities. So I made the decision, and to be fair, I had 10 years to think about this before she showed up. So I was ready to understand that, and I'd been really thoughtful about it. And part of the problem is that if we don't have any structures to think about it, we don't think about it. And that goes back to the original part of this conversation, which is that our culture really, really frowned on people being emotional. So we learn not to be emotional. We get punished for it. And so we create a culture of repression. But in that, there's a lot of hidden impacts. So after World War II, it's not just that like the repression was like it led to the 50s. It led to a lot of unseen consequences, including in science, right? So medicine became biotechnical, and it was kind of assumed that anything dealing with the emotions was woo, because there wasn't any science that had been done to examine it. And the reason was because it was thought to be woo, so no one would invest in science. So you got this kind of like
Circular issue.
Circular firing squad in terms of science, in which it was not allowed to discuss emotions. And it kind of created this false narrative that the mind and the body are separate systems. But it's kind of like saying the mechanical system and the fluid system are separate systems in a car. But the difference here is that, say you're the car and your mechanic says, I only deal with the mechanical systems, your car's going to fall apart. Guess what happens in our bodies? If the doctors say, I'm only dealing with the physical systems, but ignoring the fact that those are impacted by the emotional systems and the emotional regulation. And now we're in this trauma-informed culture. But when we started our movie, it was just like people were violently opposed to Dr. Sarno's idea. And now we live in the trauma-informed world, and he's still not even being kind of acknowledged because he was so far ahead of his time. He's getting Semmelweised, And Semmelweis discovered germ theory before Pasteur, but he was called insane and a witch, put in an insane asylum, and died a year later.
That's very disturbing.
It's true.
And I think we have touched on a few aspects of your talk, which I'm so excited about, because you combine your personal experience, your passions, and your work all together in this talk. And so I don't want to give too much away to the audience, but I want to ask you two questions before we wrap up. And the first one is, what inspired you to get on the TEDx stage now? Like, why now, and why the TEDx stage?
Well, I think that the TEDx stage is a really great platform for discussing exactly what I want to discuss, which is the intersection between idea, science, technology, reality, and most importantly, story. And so much of the time we negate the importance of story. So when we think about medicine, right? The story of medicine from like 1948 through 2015 was science will save us, right? We are going to unlock all of these truths. But if you're only unlocking the truths that you're looking for, which are entirely physical, and you completely shun anybody who mentions, well, we blush without controlling it. So clearly something's going on with the emotions and the limbic system. But, honestly, this is the craziest thing of all. Like, I remember when I was working on the movie in like 2017, I think it was University of Virginia did a study where it had been thought that the limbic system ended at the neck because they could see where all of the limbic, communication systems were. but they couldn't see it in the brain. Then someone did this reverse engineering where they did like a ink dye transfer of a brain, and it revealed like what you would almost call the mycelium or something of the limbic system that covered the whole brain. But before then, because they couldn't see it, they wouldn't acknowledge that it was possible it existed. And that's the thing. If we can't see it, we won't say it. But if we're not even looking for it, or we don't know how to look for it, and we say it's not there, it's kind of bullshit. And it creates really big problems.
It's very interesting.
Yeah,
I was talking to another speaker yesterday, and we were talking about how, and it's a little bit of a different topic, but medicine, and how his aspiration is to continue to move away from treating of symptoms and doing more holistic medicine. And so I think that touches on something that you're touching on, which is like, okay, it's the invisible as well. It's not just the physical symptoms, and it's also, what might be what we consider mental health is very important as well.
Right, but we make the visible and the invisible visible partly by just discussing it.
Yes,
when we don't discuss it, and we're not allowed to discuss anything. Like there's one doctor who's in the movie, and his name's Dr. Clark. He mentioned that it was like only after 4 years of medical school did he finally get one lecture on stress and the mind-body connection. One lecture the whole time. And even that one lecture prepped him for 10 years later when someone came in and they just couldn't figure anything out. He said, he saw a psychologist in the elevator. He said, hey, this person's got this incredible gut pain. I can't find anything physically wrong. Would you go talk to her? And so he did. And I'm glad I'm telling you this now because I couldn't fit it in the talk. But she did. And so the next day he saw her in the elevator again and said, oh, hey, did you get to see my patient? And she said, yeah, she's gone. He said, what? Well, yeah, we started talking and she told me she was sexually abused as a child. And we quickly made a connection to something that happened recently that brought that up. What? Yeah. And as soon as she realized that, her pain was gone and she left. She'd been on a morphine trip for a month and a half. And he was like, what? So he started actually using that, starting to talk to people. And he has this other incredible story about like a woman, because now he knew this. Again, you can't see it, you can't say it. A woman came in, she had terrible pain. And he said, where's the pain? And she went, it's right here. She pointed like that. Mm-hmm. He said, okay. And then he just kept, have you had any traumatic experiences? And she said, well, not really. I had a pretty wonderful life. Well, you know what? Actually, I was with my brother in a bar about 10 years ago. And he got into an altercation with this guy who shot him. And she went, and you know what? I actually saw that guy in a gas station a couple of weeks ago. He got out and nobody told me.
And the pain was where she was pointing to.
That's when he said, so where did your brother get shot? And she just went white as a sheet. And she was like, oh my God. And then she burst into tears and processed the grief of that and the kind of that fear that was brought up, and she left. And so he did that 7,000 times. But if you're not asking the question, you're not going to get the answer.
And I think that was what I was going to ask you. My second question was like, what would you want the audience to kind of take away from your talk? Or like, what's something that, is meaningful to you, a point that you want to make to the audience? And that's a great point. But is there anything else that you want to...
I can say this about it. Like, so here's the thing. One of the most important things to learn about repression of emotions is that oftentimes the repression will lead to another emotional response. So for instance, say you're feeling really hurt and sad. Something makes you feel sad and you don't feel safe feeling sad. You might get angry. So every time we're angry, it's about us, right? That doesn't mean we shouldn't be angry, but we can question, why are we angry? And the reason I say this is because, for me, yes, it made me pretty angry the way the science community treated Dr. Sarno, but also treated these ideas and made it so hard to get them into the world. And he was an outcast and a schmuck and doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't have any randomized controlled trials to prove that he's correct. But his proof was that his patients left and they were better, almost all of them. And in fact, actually, since then, they've done studies that have proved Dr. Sarno to be correct in most of what he was talking about. But here's the rub. If you're in that situation and it makes you angry, you're not going to be an effective communicator. You're not going to be open-hearted about getting those ideas seen. So instead of being angry, we have empathy for those who can't see it, and we try to connect in human ways where we don't use that anger to dehumanize the other. And even if they're going to dehumanize us, we have the strength of mind to be like, I'm okay with me, and that's all that matters.
I love that. And I love that applied in a few different contexts in this day and age. So I would love
it's definitely
to...
a part of the political conversation right now, too, because,
Exactly.
Being mad about what's going on actually just makes us much less effective at addressing it.
Very counterproductive. I would agree with you. So thank you for that advice. I appreciate that. I'm sure all of our listeners will as well. So I would love to wrap up today,
Sure.
Michael, by telling you how much we are looking forward to having you here in Hickory, North Carolina. And we're very excited for you to take the stage. And we also want to thank you for sharing such a personal story. Our audience is really in for a treat. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
And I want to take this opportunity to say that your help in designing the story and your support has been really meaningful to me.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. It's my pleasure, and it's such a joy. We'll see you in June.
Okay, sounds good.
To all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Tune in next week for another episode of Speak with Purpose to get insights into our speakers, sponsors, and partners for TEDxCatawba. You can also learn more about our independently organized TEDx event and purchase your tickets on our website, TEDxCatawba.com. We're also on social media. It's TEDxCatawba. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and X. Thank you so much, and see you next week.